my name's Ketevan. Welcome back to my channel. I have been thinking quite a bit about book buying systems lately, and it reminded me of a system that I actually had in place last year, and I don't think I spoke about too much. So the system was that sort of encouraged my use of the library rather than just buying the book and reading it myself. I basically give myself an allowance of one book purchase per month of a book that I had previously read for free or at the library or whatever. And if I liked it that much and I wanted it to be part of my collection, I would be allowed to buy one of those books every month. So I thought it'd be fun to share the 12 books that I decided to buy because I like them so much. Now, I don't think these are the best books I read of that year, but they are the books that I had already read and yet decided to spend money on. So I think that does say something about them in the sense that I usually am the type of person to get rid of books if I didn't like them. I'm very happy to have borrowed a book from the library if I didn't enjoy it, because I'm like, oh good, I did not want to spend money on that. I do love spending money on books, but I don't like spending money on books that I didn't really quite enjoy, at least quite a bit. So with that being said, we'll just jump straight into the list. I'm going to go chronologically. January's pick was The Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka. I think most people have read this in high school. I was in well into my 30s when I read it for the first time, and actually I really enjoyed it. I was surprised. I kind of, required reading usually is not like my favorite, but I really enjoyed it. I actually had no idea what this is about, even though I had read The Metamorphoses in college and loved it, and I was telling a former partner of mine like years ago that I loved Metamorphoses and it was like one of my favorite books, and then he started talking about Kafka, and I was like, what are you talking about? And he's like, I thought you said you read Metamorphosis. And I'm like, oh no, I read Ovid's Metamorphoses. I've never read anything by Kafka. And he kind of looked at me as if it was like, what, you're reading Ovid but you've never read Kafka? Like, and I was just like, wait, is that like something I should be reading? And then of course I never went back to read it. But then last year I did, or maybe it was the year before actually I read it, but January, that was my first purchase of the year, to purchase a copy of Metamorphosis. And I mean, it's classic. It's about a man who turns into a bug and he's like, what am I doing with my life? What is happening? But then I was very delightfully surprised and decided I need to own a copy of this. And then the next one for February was Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. Again, this was something that a guy I dated in high school very briefly. He was like, he just looked at me, he's like, it's a really good book, you should read it. And I don't know, like, my little baby feminist heart was like, if you think it's that great, it's probably not that great. And it's true, it's very problematic in a lot of ways, but I remember sitting in the mountains on vacation, listening to the audiobook and just like, puttering around, sweeping, cleaning, cooking, and like all of a sudden the ending was happening and I was like, oh my God. And like, I was just like, and my partner was like, what is going on? And I'm like, I just got to the end of Mice and Men. And he was like, oh yeah, I remember that book too. So I just was like, wow, this is such a great little book. It's short. John Steinbeck's a Nobel Prize winner, I think, and I'm sure he's written other great books. I'm not a big fan of diving into his literature, but I was actually quite impressed with this one, so I decided to add it to my collection. All right, the next one is The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin. I picked this up right after reading Giovanni's Room, and I listened to the audiobook and I was like, oh, this is like a proper essay. Like I'm going to want to have this written down to annotate it and like go through it. And so now I have my own copy that I can do that with when I read it for the second time, probably in the next 3 to 5 years, not anytime soon, but now I have my copy. And the next was Johnny Appleseed by Joshua Whitehead. If you didn't see that video, this book is actually the one that inspired me to have a third category for my Read Around the World challenge, because Joshua Whitehead is not a man, he's Two-Spirit. So I said, well, wouldn't it be cool if I could find like a transgender author for every country around the world? Spoiler, you really can't, it's quite hard, but I'm going to try, right? And so Johnny Appleseed is, I think, their first novel, and it's about a sex worker who is kind of in a fever dream trying to save up to be able to travel back home to the reservation, because I don't know if is it a stepfather who died? Somebody died, and getting back to the reservation is important, but there's not enough money currently in the bank. So the character has to work quite a bit to earn that money. And I really just loved that book so much. I really enjoyed it. And it was quite, again, like a surprise to me that I loved it so much. Next up is Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. So this one I actually haven't read recently. I read this in high school. I actually think I'm going to be talking about books I read in high school that I want to reread in another video. I'll link that up here when the time comes. This one, I remember loving it, and I remember enjoying reading it and being like, wow, this is so cool that it's like an assigned book and it's actually good. But I don't really remember much of it other than the character Janie. She has sort of like 3 different main relationships as she's just escaping a terrible life to another terrible life, and she's trying to figure herself out. But it's a classic by Zora Neale Hurston, and I'm really looking forward to reading more by her. But I thought before I dive into other works by her, I should probably give this one a reread first. So I haven't done that yet, but I have a copy for when I'm ready to do so. Next is On Fascism by Matthew MacWilliams, and this one was a very short little snappy book, just sort of like describing 12 events in US history where the US was very close to falling into fascism. I would say for most of them I knew a little bit about each historical event, but for some of them I was quite surprised, so I thought it was a really interesting format for a history book and a discussion on fascism, especially in the US, which is becoming a bigger and bigger problem every day. Next up was actually a short story by Sally Rooney, Mr. Salary. It's, I think all her short stories are available online on the magazine website where they originally published, but Faber and Faber has this really cute little collection of short works that they put out, and I just saw it in a bookstore and I said, you know what, I'll make that my purchase of the month because I really enjoyed this short story. It's about a young woman who sort of moves in with this like friend of the family, and it's sort of her uncle, but it's not her uncle. And it's a very interesting dynamic. I won't get into the details because it is a short story, so there's not too much that I can say without spoiling. But yeah, I really enjoyed that short story. It's probably, I think, her best short story. And then next is Song of Achilles by Madeleine Miller. I think I had purchased Circe for book club and then just read Song of Achilles from the library because I was like, oh yeah, I enjoyed Circe's, let's continue on. And I was like really surprised I liked this. And I don't think I bought this one right away because I know I found it used for a couple euros in Paris. But again, it was like I just saw it and I was like, oh, that would be perfect for, you know, a purchase in this little category. Song of Achilles is about, I'm sure you know it. Never mind, you know what Song of Achilles is about. I won't bore you. So next up is The End of Policing by Alex Vitale, I think is how you say his name. This one is a nonfiction about discussing how the end of policing might happen in some place like the United States where the over-policing has become quite normal and common. If you don't know, the police system is quite recent in human history. Like it's maybe a couple hundred to a few hundred years old. And before that, police systems were not a part of society. And so their invention and creation and expansion is quite new. And so he sort of goes through all the hows and whys of reducing that expansion back to almost nothing. So I really found that super compelling, and again wanted a copy to annotate and reference when I wanted to. And then next up is Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead by Olga Tokarczuk, I think is how you say her name. Sorry. It's a Polish novel, and it's about an old woman who lives in this very rural, wintry mountain town, and you know, men just start dying, and she's convinced that the animals are killing the men in retribution for being hunted. So it's one of those, like, you know, kooky old lady narrators, which I love so much. And I just was reading this from the library and I was like, oh my gosh. And I ordered it before I even finished the book because I was like, I know I'm going to want to have a copy of this. And I really, really enjoyed it so much. And next up is Disability Visibility edited by Alice Wong. This was another nonfiction. It's a collection of essays that are written by different disabled people that are maybe disabled in ways that we don't normally think about, or ways that are literally not as visible. So there's a variety of different ones. The ones I remember off the top of my head that I found super impactful for me personally were, there's one where she talks about the definition of beauty, and I forget the disease she has, but she has something that basically makes her asymmetrical. So like her face and her facial features are literally not symmetrical. And like in any art class, or like, you know, our classical understanding of beauty, symmetry is a huge part of that. So she talks about how she will never be beautiful in that like artistic, objective sense. And she sort of discusses the implications of that. And the second one was about being deaf in prison. So that's sort of like my two little social justice like passions is deafness and criminology, and that is a very, very overlooked intersection, because deaf people are often over-policed, and when they are imprisoned, their needs are definitely not met in any shape or form. So that was a collection of essays that was very, very quite excellent. And then last but not least, I actually haven't bought this book yet because I kind of forgot to, but I'm definitely going to. The Viral Underclass by Stephen W. Thrasher. And this one I actually haven't purchased yet because I haven't found like a good deal on it yet, but I will at some point. And this one is all about how basically, you know, we think of infectious disease as this thing that's like germ-based, and if you get the bacteria or the virus, you get sick and you have a chance of dying, and that's that. But really, that's not true. And I think maybe now, post-COVID, we all understand that a little bit better. But this book really goes into detail about why that is and how we can change that, because social inequalities are actually the root of all healthcare inequalities, and it really is something that is not biological or innate. We can change that. And that is the great thing about the human race, is that we are social and that we take care of each other. And unfortunately, in this aspect, we're kind of failing at that. Not that we're being super successful in the other components of humanity, but, you know, this book does discuss COVID a bit, but it also talks about HIV and other infectious diseases that we think of as more of like, oh, it's like, you know, it's biological. There's nothing, you know, we can do except avoid the bacteria, and that's it. And the reality is that's not quite the case. So I listened to this, I read it very quickly. I was just nodding along most of it, and I really would like to have a copy to have on hand for references. So those are the 12 books that I read from the library last year that I loved so, so much that I needed a copy of my own. Has that ever happened to you? Do you ever like go to the library and get a book and you're like, oh my gosh, like this is so great, I need to own a copy? Do you go out and buy it right away? I'm sure you don't have a system like me because I'm a total dork and I get that. But how do you, decide whether or not a book is worth reading if you've already read it before, or if you've gotten it from the library or whatnot? So I'm really curious to hear more from you on that if you have any thoughts to share. And until next time, bye.